Shepherd me, O God. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you. Amen. Please be seated. I know what you're wondering. Why is Reverend Ramona wearing a rose chasuble and stole during Lent? Why do we have these hangings in rows during Lent? It seems wrong to wear such a happy color during the season of penitence. Well, it's Laetare Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Lent. It's the day that we as the church express hope and joy in the midst of our Lenten fasts and penances. This change to the rose color palette allows us a glimpse of the joy that awaits us at Easter. And before we enter into these more somber days of Lent, Palm and Passion Sunday, Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday. So today, the church offers us joy and hope at a time of the liturgical year and the way too long winter when we need it most. Joy and hope. Think about the words of the 23rd Psalm sung so beautifully this morning by our choir. God revives my soul, guides me along right paths, and then through the valley of the shadow of death, through it. We don't dwell in the shadow of death, we move through it. For you are with me, O God. So the 23rd Psalm is a source of encouragement and a song of trust and confidence in God, hope and joy that God restores us. That theme of trust and confidence through God continues in today's gospel. In the reading today, it's the Sabbath. Jesus is in Jerusalem. We have Jesus, his disciples, and a man that we are told has been blind from birth. Now, to be blind, to be without sight in Jesus' time was extremely, extremely difficult. First, families believed that they were being punished by God when someone was born with what today, as we understand, as being differently abled. The gospel tells us that the disciples asked Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? This whole idea of punishment from God. But Jesus' answer is contrary to the religious beliefs of the time. He says, this man nor his parents have sinned. Now, this is an important message for his disciples and for us too, because difficult things that happen to us as humans are not caused by God. We're not being punished by God. The God of Jesus is a loving God, a new covenant God. Now, second, a person who was without sight in the time of Jesus was a weight to their family because they couldn't work or they couldn't support themselves or help the family survive. And they were thought of as burdensome by their families. And third, those who were blind were often forced to beg, usually at the city gates or the city center, the main places of people coming and going, a very visible location. Now notice in the gospel today, who sees the man who is blind? It says, as Jesus walked along, he, Jesus, saw a man blind from birth. Jesus saw him. And I wonder how many people in this extremely busy part of the city walked right past that man who didn't see him, invisible, marginalized, disenfranchised. And yet there are all these people around Jesus. There's this big crowd. His disciples were there and others who have been following him all around and witnessing his actions and miracles and listening to his parables and his preaching. And I wondered, did they not see the man that was without sight? Or had they grown so used to him that they no longer saw him at all? Well, we don't know the answer, but we do know that Jesus saw him. So what does Jesus do? He doesn't walk by, he doesn't walk away. Instead, he mixes mud with his saliva and spreads it on the man's eyes. Now, I must say, I recoil a bit at this scene. It's a bit of an ick factor for me. But then I remember the creation story from Genesis, when God formed humans from the dust of the ground, from the mud, from the dust, and breathed into nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. So I understand better the context of Jesus' actions. And then there's another contextual aspect in what happens next. Jesus tells the man to go and wash in the pools of Siloam. And biblical archaeologists can trace these pools to the site of the gardens of King David. These pools were fed by spring water, so appropriate for a mikveh, a ritual bath. This was a holy site, and the site of these pools still exists today, holy ground. So the man without sight follows Jesus' direction, and his sight is restored. But what happens next? Is there rejoicing? No, none. Instead, suspicion, lots of suspicion, and concern about rule following and authority and what is sin. How strange. Was the man really blind? We don't recognize him because he isn't blind. Is he telling the truth about how Jesus healed him? Can he explain it? No, not very well. What kind of a person, Jesus, heals on the Sabbath? Because any work done on the Sabbath is a sin. Well, as my mother-in-law used to say, bless their pointy little heads. Because the man who has his sight restored is testifying to his community and the Pharisees, the keepers of the written and oral law, that this miraculous thing has happened to him. And yet the people keep questioning him and questioning his parents and doubting him. And finally, the man whose sight is restored calls it out. He says, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he is or where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes." We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. And he goes on, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And their answer, you were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us? And they drove him out of the city. Now, isn't it interesting that those who had eyesight did not have insight about who Jesus is? Big fail for that community. Theologian Deborah Kapp writes, the religious authorities don't want to believe the man's story because it opposes the story they want to tell. They want Jesus to be a sinner because he heals on the Sabbath, not the hero of the story. They want another explanation, one that leaves them in control. So fear of losing control, of losing authority, overshadows and overwhelms what should have been a time of rejoicing. Now, I wonder if in our humanity, in our contemporary life, we do this sometimes as well. We miss an opportunity to see or receive the gifts of grace that God bestows upon us because we fear losing control or authority over our own lives. Or perhaps that the power of Jesus to heal and restore us shows up in our lives in ways that are unexplainable or make us feel uncomfortable. So we close our eyes and ears to the bright light of the world, who is Jesus. Big fail for us, too. We miss the opportunity for insight to be able to say, I was blind, but now I see. Well, here's some advice from Anna Carter Florence about seeing in the light of Jesus. She says, think about the before and after of experiencing God in Jesus. Once I saw the world like this. but now I see it like this. Once I believed this, but now I believe this. Once I lived in a place and was blind. I was sightless to certain things, but now my eyes are opened, and here is what I see and know. So it's an ongoing journey. And remember, just like the man who had his sight restored, we can't always explain Jesus. And that's where faith comes in. I believe. Now think back to the man who is driven out of the city, the man whose sight is restored. Perhaps he too should have worn a rose-colored tunic, because who does the man whose sight is restored meet on the path after he's driven out of Jerusalem? Jesus himself. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I am the Son of Man, says Jesus. I believe, says the man whose sight is restored. I came into the world so that those who do not see may see. And the man did see. So, like today, Laetare Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Lent, the man whose sight is restored is offered a glimpse of the joy and hope that awaits us all. Amen.